The scent of white roses filled the cathedral, pure, delicate and suffocating. To everyone watching, the ceremony was a fairy tale. The heir of the Reed family, Alexander Reed, was finally settling down. Cameras flashed, guests whispered, and champagne shimmered like liquid gold in crystal glasses. But for the bride standing at the altar, it wasn't a love story. It was a performance. Elena adjusted her lace veil with trembling fingers. Beneath the satin and pearls, her heart beat a rhythm she didn't dare acknowledge, fear disguised as composure. Her name on the marriage certificate read Elena Hale, a name that belonged to no one. A name she'd created to bury her past. The real one, Elena Grant, had been erased from the world years ago, along with the rest of her family's empire after a devastating scandal. The Grants had built half the city. Their logo once glimmered on skyscrapers, hospitals, and universities. But one night of betrayal and bloodshed changed everything. She was the last one left. And she was done being hunted. So when Alexander Reed's proposal came, cold, strategic, and emotionless, she accepted. He needed a wife to stabilize his public image. She needed a shield powerful enough to keep her enemies guessing. "I do," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. Alexander's sharp gaze flickered toward her, dark eyes that could slice through steel. Handsome in a cruel way, he radiated authority, the kind that made people either worship or fear him. His touch as he slid the ring on her finger was steady, almost indifferent. Yet for a fleeting second she felt warmth. Applause erupted as the priest declared them husband and wife. Cameras clicked and flashbulbs turned the world white. The newlyweds smiled for the public, their lips curving perfectly, strangers in matching masks. Later, in the privacy of the limousine, silence grew thick between them. The city lights streaked across the tinted glass, painting Alexander's features in gold and shadow. "Congratulations, Mrs. Reed," he said at last, his tone unreadable. "Thank you," she replied, matching his composure. Her wedding gown rustled softly as she turned toward the window. Outside, skyscrapers rose like silent witnesses, reminders of everything she'd lost and everything she would reclaim. He studied her for a long moment. "You don't seem like the type who dreams of weddings." She smiled faintly. "And you don't seem like the type who believes in love." For the first time he laughed, a short, quiet sound that didn't reach his eyes. They were two people who didn't believe in love, bound by marriage vows neither of them meant. But beneath that fragile peace, both were hiding their own secrets. As the car drove through the city, Elena's reflection merged with his in the window, two silhouettes bound by fate. Somewhere deep inside she made a silent vow. "I will never fall for you. And one day you'll regret underestimating me." The limousine disappeared into the night and the city kept its secrets. What neither of them knew was that this marriage, built on lies and convenience, would soon set fire to everything they thought they controlled. The mansion was beautiful in the way cold marble could be beautiful, elegant, vast, and utterly empty. Months had passed since the wedding, and Elena had learned the rhythm of her new life. Breakfasts served in silence. Dinners replaced by board meetings. Nights where the only sound in their penthouse was the echo of the city below. Alexander Reed was a husband by name only. He left early, returned late, and treated her with a politeness that stung more than cruelty. Still, Elena played her role flawlessly, the poised Mrs. Reed. Her beauty graced society pages. Her calm smile disarmed journalists. To the world they were the perfect power couple. But behind the closed doors of their glass-walled mansion, the distance between them was wide enough to swallow her whole. She wasn't sure when she started waiting for him, for his footsteps in the hall, the sound of his voice, the faint scent of his cologne. The realization unsettled her. This wasn't part of the plan. She was supposed to stay invisible, untouched, unmoved. But every time he brushed past her, every time his hand accidentally grazed hers, something fragile inside her trembled. One evening she found him in his study, sleeves rolled up, expression sharp under the glow of a desk lamp. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering briefly in his eyes. "You're still awake," he said. "I couldn't sleep," she replied, her voice quiet. "I thought maybe we could have dinner together tonight." He hesitated, then nodded once. They ate in silence, the clinking of silverware echoing between them. When their eyes met, she caught something there, a softness he quickly buried under indifference. For a fleeting second, Elena thought maybe there was still a chance. Maybe they could be more than a contract written in gold ink. But the illusion shattered the next morning. She had gone to deliver some documents to his office. A harmless gesture, something a wife might do. But as she approached his door, she heard laughter. Feminine, intimate. A voice she didn't recognize, smooth and warm like honey. Vanessa Lee. The name alone made Elena freeze. She'd seen it once in an old news article. Alexander Reed's first love, the woman who turned down his proposal 5 years ago. Through the crack of the half-open door, Elena saw her. Perfect, polished, her hand brushing Alexander's arm as they stood too close. "I missed you, Alex," Vanessa murmured. "You look tired. You always work too hard when you're unhappy." Alexander didn't move away. He just sighed, weary, familiar. "You shouldn't be here, Vanessa." "But you didn't tell me to leave," she said softly, smiling. The words hit Elena like a blade wrapped in silk. Her fingers tightened around the file in her hands, the papers bending under her grip. Without a sound, she turned away. In the reflection of the hallway mirror, her eyes looked different. No longer the soft, uncertain gaze of a woman in love. They were sharp now, glacial. That night, she sat by the window, staring at the city lights below. Love was never supposed to be part of her plan. But betrayal she understood. And in that quiet room, she whispered the words that would change everything. "If you can betray me, Alexander Reed, then so can I." The first crack had formed. And soon the whole glass world they'd built would begin to shatter. Rain fell hard that night, turning the city into a blur of silver and shadow. Inside the Reed mansion, the lights burned low, too quiet, too still. Elena stood in her dressing room, her suitcase half-packed, her fingers trembling as she folded the last of her silk blouses. It had been 3 months since she'd overheard Alexander and Vanessa together. 3 months of pretending she didn't see the lingering perfume on his jacket, or the missed dinners that stretched into dawn. Every lie she told herself, that maybe it was business, that maybe he'd still come home to her, had collapsed under its own weight. The silence between them had turned into something poisonous. He no longer looked at her. And when he did, his eyes were distant, as though she were already gone. She wanted to hate him. It would have been easier. But hate required the heart to be whole, and hers was already fractured beyond repair. A flash of lightning lit the room, followed by a low rumble of thunder. The sound steadied her, a reminder that endings rarely come quietly. She picked up her wedding ring and stared at it, the gold catching the pale light. It had once symbolized protection, a pact between two people who promised not to love each other. Somehow she had broken that promise, and now she was paying the price. "Elena." The voice behind her made her freeze. Alexander stood at the doorway, his tie loosened, raindrops glistening in his hair. His eyes flicked to the suitcase, then to her hands. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said softly. "You don't need me here anymore." He took a slow step forward, his expression unreadable. "Is that what you think this is about?" She met his gaze, calm, unflinching. "You made it clear, Alexander. In every way that matters." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Vanessa means nothing. Then why did you let her stay?" The question hung between them, sharp and trembling. The rain hammered harder against the windows. He didn't answer. That silence, that final devastating silence, was all she needed. "I won't stay and beg for scraps of affection," she whispered, her voice breaking in places she didn't mean it to. "Not from a man who doesn't see me." She brushed past him, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. The scent of roses lingered faintly in her wake, the same scent she'd worn on their wedding day. "Elena." His voice stopped her at the door, low and rough. "If you walk out now, don't come back." She turned, meeting his gaze one last time. "I wasn't planning to." The words struck like glass, shattering between them. Outside, her car waited in the rain, headlights cutting through the darkness. She climbed in without looking back. As the driver pulled away, she pressed her palm against the window, watching the mansion fade into the distance. A gilded cage dissolving into stormlight. By morning she was gone. No letters, no explanations. Only a gold ring left on the nightstand beside his bed, gleaming like a quiet curse. Alexander found it hours later. He didn't say a word. But for the first time in years, the house felt like a tomb. And somewhere, far beyond the city lights, Elena Grant, the woman he thought he knew, began to awaken. 2 years later. The world had changed and so had she. A black limousine glided to a halt before the glass facade of Grant Holdings' new headquarters. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, and a ripple of astonishment spread through the crowd. Elena Grant, it's really her. The lost heiress has returned. After 2 years, she's taken back the Grant empire. Inside the car, Elena sat poised and calm, her reflection flawless in the tinted glass. The woman who stepped out was no longer the quiet, trembling bride from before. She wore a tailored ivory suit that framed her like armor, her hair swept up in a sleek twist, diamond earrings glinting like ice. As she faced the cameras, her expression was composed, regal. Every flash of light that once exposed her was now a crown on her head. "Miss Grant," one reporter called, voice breathless. "You've come back to reclaim your family's company after years in hiding. How does it feel to be back?" Elena's lips curved into a subtle smile. "It feels," she said, her tone even and unshaken, "as if I've finally come home." The murmurs grew louder, the headlines already writing themselves. In the eyes of the public, the missing heiress had returned from the dead. What they didn't know was the war she'd fought in silence, the years she'd spent rebuilding what was destroyed. She had worked under aliases, acquired companies in secret, rebuilt her father's legacy piece by piece until Grant Holdings was once again a force to be reckoned with. And now she was back to claim everything that had once been hers. Everything. When she entered the boardroom, the directors rose immediately. Their faces were lined with surprise, awe, and a touch of fear. "Ms. Grant," the chairman stammered, "we didn't expect. You didn't expect me to survive," she finished smoothly, taking her seat at the head of the table. "But here I am. And from now on, this company will no longer bow to anyone." Her words carried the weight of steel, and every man in the room understood. Elena Grant was not to be underestimated. Later that evening, as she gazed out from her office window, the skyline stretched before her, towers of glass and ambition. Somewhere among those glittering buildings stood Reed Enterprises. She hadn't spoken his name in 2 years, but it lived in the quiet moments between breaths. Alexander Reed. The husband who betrayed her. The man who taught her what it meant to break. She traced her fingers along the window pane, watching the reflection of the city flicker in her eyes. She had thought of him when she signed her first acquisition contract. When she climbed every rung of the ladder that men like him had built to keep her out. And now, when she stood at the top, she thought of him again, not with longing but with precision. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Her assistant Marcus stepped in holding a silver tablet. "Ms. Grant, there's a gala invitation from the Reed Group," he said. "They're hosting an international partnership summit. Shall I decline?" Elena's lips curved slowly, not into a smile but something colder. "No," she said. "Accept it." Marcus hesitated. "You're certain?" "Yes." Her gaze never left the window. It's time. Alexander Reed saw exactly what he threw away. Outside, the night city shimmered like 1,000 unspoken promises. For the first time in years, Elena Grant allowed herself to feel the faintest stir of anticipation, not for love but for revenge. And as the storm clouds gathered above the skyline, the world had no idea that the woman once hidden would soon set it ablaze. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and quiet ambition. Every elite in the city had gathered for the Reed Group's International Partnership Summit, a spectacle of wealth, power, and whispered alliances. Cameras flashed as champagne flowed, crystal and laughter blending into a haze of golden light. And then the room shifted. A murmur rippled through the crowd as the doors opened, revealing a woman in silver. Her gown shimmered like liquid moonlight, each step deliberate, graceful, lethal. "Elena Grant," someone breathed, disbelief and awe lacing the name. Heads turned. Even the orchestra faltered for a moment. At the far end of the ballroom, Alexander Reed froze. For a moment he thought it was an illusion, some trick of the light, some phantom of the past he'd tried to bury. But as she moved closer, his heart stuttered in his chest. It was her. The woman he'd lost. The wife who had vanished without a trace. 2 years and she looked untouched by time, colder, stronger, infinitely out of reach. Elena. The name escaped him before he could stop it. She met his gaze and the air between them changed. The room disappeared, the laughter dimmed. It was as if the world itself had gone silent to watch them. "Mr. Reed," she greeted, her voice even, smooth as glass. "It's been a long time." He swallowed the sudden tightness in his throat. "You're back." "So it seems." Her lips curved faintly, not a smile but something measured, distant. "Congratulations on your summit. I see your empire's still thriving." "And yours," he said, his voice lower now, cautious. "Grant Holdings, impressive resurrection." Their eyes locked, the past flickering in the space between them. Vows whispered under cathedral light, the sound of rain the night she left, the ring he'd found on his nightstand. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Her return, the questions he would ask, the apologies he might give. Yet standing before her now, every word felt like ash on his tongue. "I didn't think you'd ever come back," he admitted quietly. "I didn't either," she replied. "But life has a way of rewriting stories, doesn't it?" A faint note of music swelled around them, violins weaving through the tension. A waiter passed, offering champagne. She took a glass, her fingers brushing his just long enough to remind him that she was real. "Elena," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "about what happened." "Don't," she cut him off gently. "We don't need to revisit ghosts. Tonight I'm here for business." He hesitated, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Then let's talk business." But his eyes betrayed him. They burned, filled with the things he'd never said. And hers. They were unreadable, but deep beneath the polished calm, something flickered. A hint of old pain, carefully hidden behind control. As the evening wore on, they circled each other like two stars pulled by gravity, never touching but unable to drift apart. The whispers around them grew louder. The Reed heir and the Grant heiress reunited at last. When she finally turned to leave, he spoke, voice quiet and rough. "You look happy." She paused, glancing back over her shoulder. "I look powerful, Mr. Reed. Happiness is overrated." Then she walked away, her silver gown trailing like starlight in her wake. Alexander stood frozen, the taste of regret sharp on his tongue. He watched her disappear into the crowd, knowing one truth with terrible clarity: he had lost her once. And this time she wasn't someone he could simply call back. She was his equal. His rival. His reckoning. The following weeks felt like a duel fought in glass towers and boardrooms. Elena Grant and Alexander Reed, two names the media could not stop repeating, were everywhere. Every paper headline, every investor column, every whispered conversation in high-rise lounges carried their story. The heiress who rose from the ashes. The man she once married. Enemies, partners, or something else. To the public, they were rivals circling a massive merger between Grant Holdings and Reed Enterprises. A billion-dollar alliance that could change the shape of the entire industry. But beneath the glossy press statements and the handshakes was something far more dangerous. Unresolved history. Unspoken emotions. Unforgiven sins. In the boardroom, their meetings were a study in tension. "Elena, your proposal cuts our projected margin by 12%, Alexander said coolly, tapping the tablet before him. "That's a generous offer, for you." She leaned back in her chair, perfectly calm. "Then you should consider it a compliment. I rarely give anyone generosity." A few executives shifted uneasily. The air between them pulsed like a live wire. Alexander's eyes lingered on her longer than they should have. The woman seated across from him wasn't the quiet wife he once ignored. She was formidable, her voice low, her confidence a weapon polished to perfection. Every word she spoke carried precision, control. And yet, every time she met his gaze, he felt that same unrelenting pull. When the meeting ended, she gathered her documents. "I'll have my lawyers revise the contract." He rose too. "You could just stay for lunch. It's been years since we..." She cut him off with a faint, practiced smile. "Since we played husband and wife?" The silence that followed was deafening. "Elena," he said finally, his voice low, almost pleading, "I made mistakes. You know that." She stopped at the door, her reflection catching in the glass wall. Two mirrored figures, once bound by promises, now divided by pride. "Mistakes," she repeated softly. "You didn't make a mistake, Alexander. You made a choice." And with that she was gone. That night, Alexander sat alone in his penthouse, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. Rain lashed against the windows, just like the night she left. He remembered every detail, her pale face under the lightning, her voice trembling when she said goodbye. He told himself he was protecting her, that distance was safer than love. But watching her now, untouchable, untamed, he knew the truth. He hadn't protected her. He'd lost her. And now she was back to prove she didn't need him at all. Across the city, Elena stood on her balcony, the skyline glittering like 1,000 fallen stars. Her phone buzzed, an unread message. Alexander, you once said love was weakness. I disagreed then. I understand now. She stared at the words for a long time before deleting them. Love wasn't weakness. But it was distraction. And she couldn't afford that. Not now, not when she was so close to reclaiming everything she'd lost. Yet when she closed her eyes, the memory of his voice haunted her. The warmth, the regret, the way he used to say her name like it meant something. She hated herself for remembering. The next morning when she arrived at Grant Holdings, her assistant handed her a folder. Ms. Grant, about the merger negotiations, Mr. Reed personally requested to meet you. Privately. Her fingers tightened around the file. For a long moment she said nothing. Then in a voice steady as glass she replied, "Tell him I'll be there." Her heart betrayed her with a single extra beat. The war had begun, not of business but of hearts still bleeding beneath their crowns. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. It beat against the mirrored windows of Reed Enterprises, tracing ghostly lines down the glass like the city itself was crying. Inside, the air was taut with tension. Elena sat at the long table in the conference room, her posture regal, her tone razor-sharp as she reviewed the final merger draft. Alexander stood at the head of the table, silent. Every executive in the room could feel it. The crackling storm between them that had nothing to do with business. Clause 47 gives your board veto power over any Grant Holdings project exceeding $50 million, she said coolly. Unacceptable. Alexander's jaw flexed. It's a safeguard. Not a leash. It's a reminder, she returned, meeting his eyes, that you still think control is the same as loyalty. The silence that followed was a blade poised in midair. He dismissed the board with a gesture. Leave us. When the door closed, it was just them again. No titles, no spectators, no buffer. Elena, he said softly, why are you doing this? Is it really revenge? Her laugh was quiet, bitter. You think I built an empire just to spite you? I think, he said, stepping closer, that you built it to hide from what you still feel. She held her ground even as his nearness stirred everything she'd fought to bury. Don't flatter yourself. What I feel is irrelevant. Is it? His voice lowered, rough, dangerous. Because every time I see you walk into a room I can't breathe. For one heartbeat her mask slipped. Then she turned away. You should practice breathing, Mr. Reed. You'll need it when this deal goes through. He caught her wrist, not hard but enough to make her still. You left without a word, Elena. I searched for you. Do you know what that did to me? She faced him then, eyes burning. And what did it do for me, Alexander? You had Vanessa in your office while I stood outside with the papers you never read. I left because I refused to disappear in your shadow. His hand fell away slowly. The distance between them felt infinite. I ended things with Vanessa months before you left, he said, voice breaking. I never. The door burst open. Vanessa. She looked pale, desperate, mascara smudged. Alex, you can't let her do this. Don't you see? She's using you. She's the reason your shareholders are panicking. Vanessa, not now, he began. No. Her voice cracked. She's lying to you. She's not who she says she is. Her real name isn't Elena Hale. She's Elena Grant. The words shattered the air. For a moment no one breathed. Then cameras flashed from the hallway. Someone had leaked it. Reporters were already there. The secret was out. Elena stood motionless, her spine straight as glass. Slowly she turned toward Vanessa. Congratulations, she said softly. You've just made me the most powerful woman in this building. Alexander's eyes widened. Elena. She faced him, calm but trembling beneath the surface. You wanted truth, Alexander. Now you have it. The next hours blurred. Security, reporters, headlines screaming her name. The hidden bride revealed. Grant Heiress was Reed's wife. By midnight she was alone in her office, city lights flickering like distant fire. Her empire had survived the exposure, but her heart had not. When Alexander finally found her, she didn't look up. "You should thank her," she said quietly. "Vanessa did what you never could, ended this." He took a step closer, voice raw. "Don't walk away again." She looked at him then, and for the first time tears trembled in her eyes, not of weakness but of release. "I already have," she whispered. And with that, Elena Grant, the hidden bride, the woman who once begged to be seen, walked out into the rain. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city wrapped in a fragile kind of silence. It was the silence after everything had already fallen apart. News of Elena's true identity had spread like wildfire. Every headline screamed her name. "The Grant heiress returns and destroys Reed empire in one move." Grant Holdings stock surged overnight. Reed Enterprises plunged. Investors whispered betrayal. Competitors smelled blood. And in the middle of it all, Alexander Reed stood before the ruins of everything he had built, knowing she hadn't even lifted a hand. Her existence alone had been enough. He hadn't seen her since that night. She had vanished again, leaving behind only press statements and lawyers. But when his phone rang days later with a single message, "She's at St. Vincent Hospital," his world stopped. Elena lay in a private ward, pale against the white sheets, a thin line of bandages along her arm. A car had run a red light the night before. Nothing fatal, the doctors said, but she'd been lucky. Very lucky. Alexander stood at the door, his hand tightening around the frame. He'd spent years mastering control, but as he saw her there, fragile, real, alive, everything inside him unraveled. "Elena," he whispered. Her eyes opened slowly. For a heartbeat, confusion crossed her face. Then came recognition and something colder. "You shouldn't be here. I had to see you." She turned her face away. "Why? To make sure I survived long enough to ruin you completely?" He stepped closer. "Because I thought I'd lost you again." Her breath caught, a flicker of something breaking through her calm. "You didn't lose me, Alexander. You let me go." He flinched at the quiet truth in her words. For a long time neither spoke. Only the steady hum of hospital machines filled the room. Finally he said softly, "Do you hate me that much?" Elena's lips curved in a small, tired smile. "I tried. Every night for 2 years I told myself I hated you. But hate doesn't keep you awake at 3 a.m. Hate doesn't make you remember someone's voice." She closed her eyes. "It just hurts less to pretend." He reached for her hand, hesitated, then took it gently. "I never stopped looking for you. Then why didn't you find me?" Her voice cracked. "I waited, Alexander. For a month. For a sign. But you never came. I thought you wanted to disappear," he said, his throat tight. "You were free of me. I thought that was what you wanted." She laughed softly, but there was no joy in it. "You always assume you know what everyone wants. You never ask." The words hit him like a blade. "I was angry," he confessed. "But not at you. At myself, for not protecting you, for not seeing you when you were right there in front of me." Her eyes glistened, the emotion she'd held for so long spilling through the cracks. "And what now, Alexander? What do you see when you look at me?" He leaned closer, his voice low and trembling. "I see the woman I should have fought for." The room went still. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, the way it once had before lies and power and pride destroyed everything. Her hand tightened slightly in his. "You're too late," she whispered. "Then let me be late," he said, his voice breaking. "But don't let me lose you again." A tear slipped down her cheek, and for once she didn't hide it. "Maybe we've already lost each other," she said softly. "And maybe that's okay." He bowed his head, the weight of her forgiveness and his guilt crushing him. "I don't want okay. I want you." For a moment she almost believed him. Almost. Then the nurse entered and the fragile spell shattered. Elena turned her face away. "You should go," she murmured. "You have a company to rebuild. And I have a life to live." Alexander stood still, the words cutting him deeper than any wound. Finally he nodded. "If you ever need me." "I won't," she said, but her voice shook. When he left, she exhaled shakily, tears sliding down silently. Because even after everything, her heart still whispered the truth she couldn't bear to speak aloud. He still loved him. The city never truly slept, but tonight its glow felt dimmer. Clouds hung heavy above the skyline, waiting for morning to burn them away. Elena stood by the window of her penthouse, arms wrapped around herself. The accident had healed quickly, but something inside her had not. The days since Alexander's visit drifted by in a haze of meetings, press interviews, and a loneliness she refused to name. The world saw a woman untouchable, triumphant. But every victory felt strangely hollow. Marcus, her assistant, entered quietly. "Miss Grant, you have another invitation from the Reed Foundation. They're hosting a charity gala for the flood victims in Seoul. The board thinks it would look good if you attended." She hesitated. "Alexander will be there." Marcus looked at her carefully. "That's why they want you there. The world likes reconciliation stories." Elena almost laughed. "Reconciliation," she repeated softly. "They make it sound so simple." She turned back to the window. "Tell them I'll think about it." When he left, silence filled the room again. The moon slipped through the clouds, washing her reflection in silver. Reconciliation. Maybe the world didn't need it. But maybe she did. Across the river, Alexander sat in his office, lights still burning though it was nearly dawn. His company was recovering. Slowly. Reporters praised his transparency. Investors admired his humility. But none of it mattered. The more he rebuilt, the emptier it felt. He tried to move on. Tried to convince himself that love, like any loss, could be managed with enough discipline. But every night he ended up here, staring at her name on his phone screen. He typed and erased a dozen messages before finally sending one. "Alexander, you once told me power was the only language this world respects. I understand now that love speaks louder. If you come to the gala tomorrow, I'll be there." He didn't expect a reply. And none came. The next evening, the ballroom shimmered beneath chandeliers and crystal curtains. Reporters waited, cameras ready. When Elena finally arrived, the entire room seemed to shift toward her. Her gown was black silk, elegant, unyielding. Alexander watched her from across the hall, his heart hammering in a way it hadn't in years. When their eyes met, time stilled. She approached slowly, each step deliberate, a queen returning to her throne. "Mr. Reed," she greeted softly. "You clean up well for a man who's lost half his fortune." He smiled faintly. "You're glowing for a woman who swore she didn't believe in love." They stood in silence, a heartbeat stretching into eternity. Around them, flashes went off, people whispered, but neither looked away. "Why did you come?" he asked at last. "Because I'm tired," she admitted. "Of fighting. Of pretending the past doesn't exist." He took a breath. "Then let's stop pretending. I don't want your forgiveness, Elena. I only want a chance to make it right." Her eyes softened. "Some things can't be made right." "Then let me try anyway," he said. "Even if it takes the rest of my life." The orchestra shifted into a slow waltz. For a moment neither moved. Then quietly she placed her hand in his. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't absolution. It was something in between. They danced, slow and silent, beneath the golden lights. The crowd watched the couple who had once destroyed each other move together again, fragile as dawn. When the final note faded, she stepped back, tears glinting like diamonds. "This doesn't mean I forgive you," she whispered. "I know," he said. "It just means there's still hope." She didn't answer, but when she turned away, her hand lingered against his for one last second. Outside, the first light of morning crept over the horizon, soft and uncertain. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled of rain, of things washed clean, of beginnings yet unnamed. Spring came softly that year. The storms had passed, the city bloomed again, and with it came whispers of rebirth, of companies rising from ruin, of names once buried now spoken with reverence. Elena Grant stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of Grant Holdings headquarters, her reflection merging with the skyline. Below her, the city thrummed with life, a symphony of traffic, ambition, and light. 2 years ago she had walked away from this world broken. Now she stood above it whole. A soft knock sounded at the door. Marcus entered, carrying a tablet. "Ms. Grant, the press is already gathering at the gala. They're expecting you to speak about the merger announcement." Elena smiled faintly. "Then let's give them something worth remembering." That evening, the grand ballroom was a sea of glitter and applause. The Grant Reed Foundation Gala, an event no one had believed possible. The two most powerful empires, once divided by betrayal and pride, now united in a joint venture to rebuild communities across the globe. It wasn't a merger of business. It was a statement of peace. As Elena stepped onto the stage, camera flashes flared like constellations. Her gown was ivory silk, simple, elegant, strong. The murmurs quieted as she approached the podium. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm and resonant. "2 years ago my name was hidden. My past was something I ran from. Tonight I stand before you not as a secret, not as someone's wife but as myself, Elena Grant." Applause broke out, rising and falling like the tide. She let it wash over her, then continued, "Power means nothing if it cannot build. Wealth means nothing if it cannot heal. This foundation isn't about legacy. It's about redemption, for all of us who have lost and learned." As she spoke, her gaze swept across the room and found him. Alexander stood near the back, dressed in a dark suit, quiet amid the noise. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, they held that same look he'd worn the day she left him. Regret, admiration, love restrained by humility. When their eyes met, 1,000 words passed between them without sound. When the speech ended, the applause thundered. Elena stepped down from the stage, and as the crowd pressed closer, Alexander approached her. "You were incredible," he said softly. "Thank you," she replied. "You came." "I promised," he said. "Even if I had to stand at a distance." She studied him for a moment. The lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the quiet steadiness in his voice. "You rebuilt everything," she said. "Not everything," he admitted. "Some things can't be rebuilt. Only rediscovered." Her lips curved faintly. "And what have you rediscovered, Alexander?" "You," he said simply. "But this time I won't ask for anything. You don't owe me forgiveness or love or a future." He took a breath. "I just wanted to see you, standing where you were always meant to be." For the first time in a long time, her eyes softened completely. "Maybe we both had to lose everything," she whispered, "to learn what was worth keeping." A quiet pause. Then, as if the world itself had conspired to stop and listen, she reached out her hand. Not in surrender. Not in dependence. But in peace. He took it gently. Their fingers intertwined, not out of need but choice. The orchestra began to play, soft and golden. Around them, people danced, laughed, toasted to new beginnings. Outside, the city lights shimmered like the night sky reflected on glass. Elena looked out through the window, her reflection beside his. 2 figures no longer bound by the lies of the past. She turned to him and said quietly, "I'm not the hidden bride anymore." Alexander's smile was faint, reverent. "No, you never were. I just didn't see you clearly before." The music swelled. The crowd blurred. And in that fragile, luminous moment, neither victory nor defeat remained. Only love, tempered by everything it had survived. The book. Months later, magazines would write about the power couple of the decade. Shareholders would celebrate the rebirth of 2 empires. But those who had been there, who had seen them standing side by side that night, would say something quieter. That the woman who once vanished returned not to beg, not to prove, but simply to be. And that the man who once lost her learned that love, like power, is only real when freely given. Under the endless city lights they began again. Not as the hidden bride and the distant husband, but as 2 souls finally seen. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more original novel stories. And stay tuned, our next story is coming soon.